Walt Disney gave his Maid shares over the years, and when she died she had a $9 million fortune. Do us a favor and click that like button. Also subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to be inspired by this heartwarming stories several times a day. The name Thelma Pearl Howard might not be particularly familiar, even to those with an in-depth knowledge of Walt Disney. But the housekeeper was one of the most pivotal figures in the late great animator's life. And the family entertainment pioneer showed his gratitude for her dedication and loyalty in the form of company shares. Howard subsequently accrued a whopping $9 million from these shares over a period of 40 years. Not that the maid ever flaunted her wealth. In fact, she continued to live such a modest life that many of her nearest and dearest had no idea she was a multi-millionaire until after she died. So why did the entertainment mogul hold Howard in such high regard? And why did she keep her seven-figure fortune a secret for so long? Here's a look at the story of a humble housekeeper and the bank balance which left her surviving friends and relatives in a state of shock. Born in the Idaho region of Southwick in 1915, Thelma Pearl Howard grew up on a farm with her 4 brothers and sisters in abject poverty. Tragically, she experienced a major loss as a 6-year-old when her mother passed away while in childbirth. And by her late teens she'd also lost 2 of her siblings. Howard tried to make a better life for herself by attending college in Washington state. But unable to afford the fees, she had no option but to drop out in less than a year. She subsequently relocated to Los Angeles, taking on various odds jobs including secretary, drinks server and cleaner. And it was as a cleaner where Howard would earn a fortune beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Indeed, in 1951, she landed a housekeeping position at Walt Disney's Holmby Hills estate in California. She was also required to live at the property, which contained 8 bedrooms and no less than 17 bathrooms. The 3.6-acre Disney estate also boasted its own tennis court, library, swimming pool, putting green and gym. In fact, the pool house alone was larger than the family home Howard had grown up in back in Idaho. But the maid soon proved that she was the right woman for the job. Indeed, before Howard came along, Disney had struggled to find the perfect housekeeper. Her predecessor may have been a culinary maestro, but she failed to connect with the entrepreneur's 2 children, Sharon and Diane. In fact, the employee in question actually forbade his daughters from ever entering the kitchen. She even restricted them to their rooms as she cleaned. Howard, however, couldn't have been more different. Indeed, the housekeeper doted on her famous boss's 2 girls. And she would often encourage Sharon and Diane to keep her company in the kitchen, while she was preparing the kind of 3-course meals fit for such a revolutionary entertainment figure. Diane would later share her fond memories of Howard during a chat with People magazine in 1994. She said, "When Thelma came, we spent all our time with her. She could put on a full dinner with a roast and fresh pie, and have kids drawing pictures at the kitchen table." Howard also kept her boss happy by ensuring that Disney's favorite foods were always stocked in the fridge. These included hot dogs, which he would enjoy as a starter before sitting down for his main meal. Strangely, he would give one to his beloved French poodle lady, each time too. Howard earned the nickname Foo Foo during her lengthy stint with Disney, his wife, Lillian, and their 2 daughters. And he also mentioned her in the same breath as one of his studio's most beloved creations. Indeed, the entrepreneur once described his housekeeper as the real-life Mary Poppins. However, it's fair to say that Howard wasn't exactly as prim and proper as the famous character played by Julie Andrews. Indeed, like her boss, the housekeeper smoked like a chimney. She also possessed a gruff-sounding voice, and liked nothing more than sitting down to a game of gin rummy. Howard also later built up a strong connection with Disney's grandson. Chris Miller once said, "My grandfather had an incredible rapport with her. They seemed to share everything, from a sense of humor to their notions about what was happening with the kids, and what was best for them." Around the time Howard came into Disney's life, the studio he fronted was enjoying the beginning of a golden period. In 1950, Cinderella, the company's first feature-length animation since 1942, had been a massive success at the box office across the world. And his first full-length live-action picture, Treasure Island, had received rave reviews. Disney's winning streak continued with 1951's Alice in Wonderland and 1953's Peter Pan. But it was around this period that he began to hand over more control to the studio's main animators. It seems that the entrepreneur wanted to focus on his next major business idea, the development of his very own theme park. Despite Disney's mammoth fortune, he didn't offer Howard a particularly impressive housekeeping wage. In fact, her earnings were similar to those of the everyday maid. She did, however, benefit financially by living with the family at their sprawling California estate. And the housekeeper also enjoyed several other major perks. Indeed, for every birthday and Christmas Howard spent at the Disney residence, she received shares in the movie company. The stock, of course, continued to grow each year as the company got bigger and bigger. And incredibly, the housekeeper never cashed them in as a sign of respect for her boss. Howard, in fact, even delved into her own savings to acquire more shares. Of course, she had no idea when she started receiving the stock how big a deal they would become. But between the time she was appointed Disney's housekeeper in 1965, the movie studio became an entertainment powerhouse. The opening of Disneyland in 1955 was partly responsible for the company's phenomenal success. But classic films such as 101 Dalmatians, Sleeping Beauty, and of course, Mary Poppins, also helped to boost its reputation. The box office success of the latter, in particular, helped to significantly increase its share price. Disney was renowned for rewarding his most cherished staff members by splashing the cash. Indeed, those lucky enough to get in his good books would often receive a major financial bonus. This was perhaps to compensate for the fact that he very rarely voiced his approval in person. Indeed, Disney certainly wasn't one to offer motivational words. He was reportedly a notoriously difficult man to please, expecting his army of workers to constantly adhere to his high standards. According to one employee, "That'll work" was about the closest his boss ever got to offering any praise. But those who worked on Disney's first animated feature probably weren't complaining that their boss preferred to reward his staff financially. Indeed, after Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs raked in a record-breaking tally, the studio boss showed his gratitude the only way he knew how. He gave his team a whopping $750,000 in bonuses. However, Disney was never really boss of the year material. In fact, just a few years after the release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, he became public enemy number one among his employees. And the drama began when he decided to cut staff wages after making the company's shares public. Along with the brisk manner in which Disney handled his workers, these salary cuts caused the animators' strike of 1941. Lasting for just over a month, the action resulted in a number of key artists leaving their positions. And the reputation of the studio head as a boss was tarnished forever. In fact, the writer of Walt Disney, The Triumph of the American Imagination claims that studio staff were terrified of the company's founder. Speaking at a panel to promote a 4-hour PBS documentary about Disney, historian Neil Gabler said, "The Walt Disney Studio operated like a cult, and Walt was the head of the cult. He was worshipped at the studio for a certain period of time." However, Richard Sherman, who, alongside his brother, first started writing songs for the studio at the start of the 1960s, painted an entirely different picture. The songwriter told the same panel's audience, "Disney was wonderful to us. He was a giving person. He didn't do it to make money or to aggrandize himself." Sherman, who penned classic tunes such as "It's a Small World" and "A Spoonful of Sugar," added, "Disney got great joy out of making people happy with his movies." However, the songwriter did admit that anytime the boss walked by, many of the studio's employees would begin to tremble. They would also borrow a line from Disney favorite Bambi, "Man is in the forest." Of course, Disney was always held in much higher regard by his family. The man doted on his grandchildren, in particular, and made sure that they wanted for nothing at Christmas time. Indeed, daughter Diane and her husband, Ron, would often travel to her parents' home on the big day where their kids would be showered with gifts. Indeed, Diane once said, "My father liked playing Santa." This was the mid-50s when there was a lot of Disney merchandise, and there would be a big box. We learned later that Dad sent boxes like this to a lot of people. It was just something he did, something he loved to do. Sadly, Disney, a heavy smoker, passed away at the end of 1966 from lung cancer. Howard continued to work as a maid until her retirement in 1981, and never showed any signs that she was sitting on a fortune. Indeed, she spent the following 10 years living in a modest bungalow with just 2 bedrooms. Howard then spent most of her final years in a humble nursing home, which reportedly failed to give her the care she needed. Thankfully, the former housekeeper was moved to a much better facility in which she had her own private room. Disney's daughter Diane would regularly visit her and had fresh flowers sent to her room every Monday. Howard sadly died in 1994, just a few days shy of turning 80. But even in death, her connection with her former boss remained strong. She was, in fact, interred in a pink-colored casket and buried at Forest Lawn Cemetery, which overlooks the famous Disney Studios in California. Howard's nearest and dearest later attended a will hearing, perhaps expecting to hear about little more than small change. Instead, they got the shock of their lives. Indeed, after listening to some sound financial advice, it seems the housekeeper had, unbeknown to anyone, found herself with millions of dollars in the bank. Those present were no doubt left dumbfounded when they discovered that Howard had died a multimillionaire. Yes, despite showing little sign of any considerable wealth, her stock portfolio had, in fact, netted the former housekeeper a cool $9 million or so over the years. And she'd decided that half of this figure should go towards setting up a charity foundation. Millions of dollars were subsequently donated to various charities by the Thelma Pearl Howard Foundation. Those which deal with arts education and children from a disadvantaged background particularly benefited from her kindness. The former housekeeper's own poverty-stricken background in Idaho had, it seems, inspired her to help those in a similar position. Hailing from Howard's home state of Idaho, her niece Cheryl Wallace once told People magazine how proud she was of her aunt's generosity. She said, "There had been so much pain and tragedy in my aunt's life. I think she felt she missed being young. She wanted to give something back to children." Antonia Hernandez, CEO of the Thelma Pearl Howard Foundation, told the Philanthropy News Digest how the founder's memory lives on. She said, "Mrs. Howard was a caring person who touched many people's lives. And today, years after her estate established a fund at the foundation, we remain committed to supporting her dream of helping disadvantaged and homeless children." So what happened to the other half of Howard's surprising fortune? Well, she decided to leave it to her adult son. Her one and only child, who has a developmental disability, currently resides in a full-time California-based care facility. However, that's not the end of the former housekeeper's stock story. Indeed, if the shares Howard originally received hadn't been sold, then they would have tripled due to a 3-to-1 stock split in the summer of 1998. This means that her 193,000 shares would have grown to a whopping 579,000. And in today's money, those shares would be valued at around $37 million.
We hope you enjoyed the video. Please let us know which one of these stories you found the most interesting. And if you liked the video, click on the subscription button and turn on notification so you will be the first to know when we put out a new video. We thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next time.